the book of Genesis. The word Genesis, the way we understand it, comes from the Greek, actually, and it means origins. The Hebrew word in the very first chapter, in the beginning, is the word Genesis, if you will. Bereshith is the way you would pronounce it in Hebrew. It's that whole first phrase, in the beginning. So that's really where we understand the word or the name Genesis, in the beginning. It is the book of beginnings, if you will, the book of origins, the origin of the earth, the beginning of the earth, the beginning of man, the beginning of sin, the beginning of Satan, the beginning of the Semites, or the lineage. I think it comes in chapter 6 of Genesis. This is where the Jewish people come from, as well as the nation of Israel is introduced to us here in the book of Genesis. Languages, and the breakup of languages, and the breakup of peoples and kindred and nations, all explained in the book of Genesis. The beginning of government, the beginning of law, all found in the book of Genesis. So a very important book, a book, of course, of origins, of the beginning. And so when it says in the beginning, it means more than just the story or the beginning of how the world came into being, though this first chapter is really all about that. In the beginning, God. The word God here is the Hebrew word Elohim. It is actually a plural word of the Hebrew word El or Eloah. Adding the I-M makes it plural. Elohim, Elohim, if you will. It's used 32 times in this first chapter alone. It's used a lot in the entire book of Genesis, but here in particular, 32 times, it's all about the work of God in creating, the work of God in creating this place we call home, creating not just the earth, but as you will see as we go through here, if you've never read this before, I hope you had, that it tells us an awful lot about what God created. In the beginning, God created. Hebrew word is bara, B-A-R-A. It's a wonderful word as it really talks about the creative power, the creative method that God used. The word bara is a word that does mean to create, but it has a specific uniqueness to it in that it means to create from nothing. It's like he just made it happen or made it appear. So in the beginning, God made it appear, created. First of all, it says the heavens. Now, there are, as the scripture mentions, the third heaven in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul brings that up. There are actually three heavens that we understand from the scriptural context. Here, what God is talking about in specific, in the beginning, God created the two visible heavens, the ones that we are aware of, the ones that we are familiar with. There is the first heaven, which we would call the atmosphere, the air that we breathe, and all the home of the birds and the airplanes. They all dwell here within the first heaven. The second heaven, of course, being the outer space where the planets live, and the third heaven being the place where God lives. And that's not the one we're able to see with our eyes, at least not yet. That's going to come where we will have a visual understanding of the third heaven. But the first and the second heaven, those are the ones we come in contact with to some degree. At least with our eyes, we're able to see the heavens in that sense. In the beginning, in other words, this is the story of how God created the heavens and, of course, the earth, or if you might say, the land, the sky and the land. And that's, in a sense, what this chapter is going to be primarily about. Now, we think of the earth, in this context, the earth was without form and it was void. Without form, it was void, empty. Void means empty, or a bit of a wasteland. So here was the earth as a ball floating somewhere in space. It was without form, meaning that it was empty, but also it had no order to it. There was chaos within the world. And this is the way the earth was prior to God touching it and bringing order into it. There are some who envision something happening between verses 1 and 2 that caused the earth to be in this chaotic wasteland existence. Some believe that between verses 1 and 2, the devil was cast out of heaven and cast to the earth, which explains why the earth was in this condition. People who believe that call it the gap theory. That's the way it's referred to, in that there is a gap of time that is missing between verse 1 and verse 2. I like that gap theory for a lot of reasons, but we must emphasize the word theory, only because that's a lot to read into a space between two lines on a piece of paper. There is nothing that really gives us that information, except that theologians are very disturbed that there is an earth without form and void. How could God let that happen? Well, I don't necessarily find that as so much of a problem, because that's how my life was before God came in and gave order to it. So that's the sort of thing God does. He's a fix-it God. And so when there's a problem, he normally fixes it, or he knows how to fix it. And so he came into this condition, this world in this condition, without form, void, a wasteland, a wasted piece of dirt. And he called it darkness. There was darkness. And that word darkness in the Hebrew is a word that can be referred to as like a hidden treasure, a mysterious place, in other words. The earth was without form, it was void, and it was mysterious. A mysterious covering, if you will, was on the face of the deep. This darkness, if you were, that refers to a place of misery and adversity. And it may be due, if you go back to the concept of this gap theory, it may have been in that condition because the devil was now kind of in charge of this. And that's what happens when the devil takes control of something or someone's life. He just destroys it and sucks the life out of it, turns it into a wasteland. So if you want to go into that kind of a thinking, you might be able to have a little fun with it. Just remember to emphasize the word theory. It's just an idea, a concept, but an interesting one nonetheless. So here is the earth now in this condition. And there's darkness on the face of the deep. That word deep is a word that we're familiar with from the book of Revelation, the abyss. It's the word abyss, or for the abyss, or a place that is so deep, so dark, that it's like a dungeon, if you will. And so here is this earth that was somewhat of a dungeon. And you see all of these words that are sort of describing that place where in Revelation the devils were chained. Remember? That was the abyss. That was a terrible place. So I don't know if there's a connection there. I just think I found that interesting, so I thought I'd mention it. And in all of that, I want you to see this beautiful picture. In all of that, we see the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. Now, the word the deep not only refers to something known as the abyss, but it can also be a reference to the depth of the ocean. So here is the waters, and it's believed that at this point, the earth was, in a sense, covered in water all over the globe, at least the majority of the globe. And the Spirit of God is hovering. The word in the Hebrew means to brood over with tender kindness, or there is an interest of love and compassion that God's Spirit has over the condition of the world, but seeing it perhaps as this hidden treasure of what it might become if it were turned over or worked over by the work of God. And so here's again that beautiful picture of the redeeming factor, the redeeming kindness of God over something that otherwise is a wasteland. And that might describe your life. Maybe you feel your life is a waste. Your life is a wasteland. Well, I believe that even tonight the Spirit of God is hovering over your life as if to say, you give your life over to me and I can make it all different. I can make it a beautiful garden if you'll let me take charge of your life. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. I don't know if you have heard of these new technologies that we have today. Certain things like, what is it, Alexa? That thing, Alexa, you walk into your room, you say, Alexa, turn on the light, and it turns on. And you say, Alexa, give me some mood lighting, and you turn it into some blue. Turn it into blue light, and it turns into blue. You can buy these light bulbs with all of the LED colors. You could make any color you want. And we think, wow, have we advanced? This is all done through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi connection, or however it works. And we think we're so advanced. Well, God was doing this thousands of years ago. As he walked into this mess and he said, Alexa, turn on the light. And boom, it came on instantly. No mention of the sun. Listen, the sun hasn't been created yet. It was just God who talks like that. He said, turn on the light. And suddenly light appeared. Well, again, we see that in the book of Revelation. Remember, in the book of Revelation, God got rid of the sun and the moon. We don't need it anymore. Why? Because the Lamb of God was its light. And so it's possible what we're seeing now, what brings light into darkness is the presence of God. And when light comes in, darkness is chased away. Again, a beautiful picture to us of what happens when God comes into your darkness, when God comes into our lives and turns everything around. And here is the beginning now of life on earth. The light of God, the beginning of everything, where God said, light be, and light was. Literally, the Hebrew that's the structure of the sentence. Light be, and light was. And so, the beginning, God's Spirit hovering over this miserable experience or existence of the earth, and he says, I can do something with that. And so he calls light into being, and it appears. And God saw the light, in verse 4, that it was good. This is good. And so God then divided the light from the darkness, or made a distinction, is this word divided. God made a distinction. This is good. This is not good. There is the first, if you will, distinction of right and wrong, or good and bad, or light and darkness. Light, I like. Darkness, me no like. That's the way to really understand this. I like the light. I can't live with the darkness. And so by throwing light on this, he chases away the darkness, which, by the way, is the only way to get rid of darkness, is by turning on the light. And so this has happened here in the beginning of all creation. And it began not with sunlight, but with God light, or the sun's light, as he comes into this place. And so he divided this light, made a distinction between the light and the darkness. And God called the light day, Yom. You know the word Yom Kippur? Yom, day, the day of atonement. Yom Kippur, or Yom. He called the light, the light time, the bright time, the day. And we are called in the New Testament children of the day, of the light. So walk as children of the light. And the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning, beginning in the dusk and then going until the dawn. The opposite of the way we think. We think our day begins with the dawn and it ends with the dusk. God switches that principle around. Why? Because here in Genesis 1, it began with darkness and then the light came after. And so the reminder, today, that's how the Jewish people address their calendar. They start with the dusk. Their Sabbath, for instance, that they celebrate every Friday night, starts in the evening, their Sabbath day, and it goes to the following evening when it's over, and then they start to eat and have their special time during the evenings on Saturday. So the Sabbath, the Yom, the day of the Lord is created here, and the day is marked from sunset to sunset. In verse 6, then God said, let there be a firmament, an expanse, a space. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. In other words, if there was water on the earth covering in the whole ball, the whole globe, God said, I want to separate that. So he left some water on the ground. He put a bubble in the middle of the water and went, and it just kind of just lifted. So there's water above now, water beneath. This gives rise to the theory or the understanding that there was a canopy made up of clouds around the entire earth and above our sky. So you would look up and you see a cloud cover. And in that cloud was water that was hovering there, hovering and waiting. And waiting for what? Well, the way we know the story, it waited for the flood. And when the flood occurred, it's like God took a sword, and cut open the clouds, and it all just poured down, and the water from beneath came up. And that's how the earth received so much water to make it be a global flood. We'll get to that when we get into chapter 6. And so God made this firmament, and he said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So creates the clouds. Now in verse 7, God made the firmament. In verse 1, God created the heavens. The word created in verse 1 is bara. The word made in verse 7 is asa, a different word. In other words, God shifted things around to put it where he needed it to be. He made something from something that was already there. Thus, in this case, the water. He did something to the water to separate the waters from the earth from the waters in the sky. And so he made this firmament and sort of built this up. It's a little bit of a distinction, but a very important thing. Bara is created from nothing, whereas asa is a Hebrew word meaning to make from what was already there, to create or to make or to form or to fashion from what was already available on the earth. So here, God made this expanse, this place that we call the sky. So it says in verse 8, God called the firmament heaven, or the first heaven, or as we would refer to it as the sky, our atmosphere. This is our atmosphere. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Now the first day, he created the light. Boom, there was light, and he separated the light from the darkness. The second day, he separated the waters, giving a place for air, the atmosphere, so that people can breathe and plants can breathe, and all of that was necessary, had to be. Then in verse 9, God said, let the waters under the heavens, that's on the waters on the earth now, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So this is when God took the waters that were around the globe, and he put limitations on the water. And that's where beaches come from, if you want to look at it that way. He made the beaches here in verse 9. He gathered the waters together into what we call the seas, the different seas and the waterways and the oceans and the different things that where all of the fish live today. They weren't living in there then. There were no fish there yet. He just separated the waters. God called the dry land earth, or land, and he gathered together of the waters, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So this too is a good thing. God likes what's happening now in this world that was once a wasteland and useless. God is making it now a beautiful place and a useful place. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb," or the plants. With the word herb here, don't think oregano. Think all plant life of any kind. God created the grasses, he created the plants that yield seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. A lot here. These three main divisions of the vegetable family are the vegetable kingdom, or the vegetation of the earth, mostly divided up into these three parts: the plants, the grasses, and of course the fruit-bearing trees, or trees themselves. And in particular, the fruit-bearing ones here is of note for the human consumption and for a perpetual and sustainable existence for man. This is always going to be there. In fact, if you went out to your backyard this summer and picked an apple off a tree, it's because God made it to be so. If you'll notice, he said that they have the seed. These are those that yield seed. The fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself. That was God's design. That within that seed, it is the DNA, the molecular makeup, so that this plant can continue to produce and reproduce over and over and over again after its kind. In the New Testament, Jesus said, you can't, you won't plant, I forget the exact tree now, but the point I'm making is you're not going to plant an apple seed and get an orange from it. You will always get an apple from an apple seed, an apple tree from an apple seed. You're always going to get an orange tree from an orange seed. It's never going to mix. It's important when we get into the creation of mankind. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb, or the plants, that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. This is the way he wanted it to be. And this is the way it is. This is the way it has always been, and it's always going to remain so until, of course, he comes and changes everything on this earth. So the evening and the morning were the third day. So now we've got the light. If you'll notice, the light that comes from God himself by his spoken word. We have the air, the atmosphere, and now we have plants. What we don't have yet is sunlight. The light of God is enough to bring life, of course. We're not going to need it in heaven. In this early creation, the earth didn't need it either until it was coming. And there's a reason for that, because God is obviously going to make a difference in how he relates to the world. Then in verse 14, then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven." This is the second heaven, space, outer space. "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, for days and for years." So these particular lights in the sky, or in the second heaven, are going to have an effect on the earth's seasons, on the earth's days and the nights, or the calendar, and all of these things. Well, we know that to this day, all calendars are set by the sun, by the moon. Many of you who are fishermen, you understand this. We have the tidal charts that tell you when you're going to have a high tide, we're going to have a low tide. All that's done through the moon, and obviously science and mathematics and all that, but it's all related somehow to the sun, to the moon, and all that's going on. It's exactly what God has done from the beginning. And so he created then the space. It's an odd sort of thing when you think of it, because my mind wants to think that all of these planets and everything were all floating around out there, and then God just sort of organized everything and put our solar system together, the galaxies together, and all of the other galaxies, and he said, boom, there, that's the way I want it to be. But it almost sounds as if he started with the earth and then worked out from there. And here now, a couple days later, he's now creating the outer space, which sort of comes after the fact. So I don't know how much fun he had doing this, but I imagine he had a blast, because he keeps saying, man, this is good. This is really good. I like this. And in fact, by the end of the chapter, that's exactly how it ends. He ends it by saying, this is very good. So he's got this constant joy in doing what it is that he's doing here in creation. And he said in verse 15, let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so, just as God said. Then God made, here's that word asa again, not created. Then God made two great lights, or greater lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and he made the stars also. So this, again, that word asa is not that he created the sun and the moon. These verses are talking specifically about the sun and the moon. Not that he created them at this time, but that he appointed them to a very important task. And I don't know if you've noticed, but they're still there. How many of you saw the moon 2 nights ago? It was because of the winter travel of the around the earth. It was as close as it could possibly get. I think it was very close. So we call that the super moon. And it was so bright outside. I wake up early in the morning and I walk outside, and the whole yard was bright with the light of the moon. And that's how bright it was still. And so this is the light that it's talking about. The one light would rule the day, that's the sun, and the lesser light would rule the night. Why is the moon the lesser light? Because the moon doesn't have a light source. The moon is just a reflection from the sun. It doesn't have its own light, whereas the sun is a ball of burning gas, and it is creating its own heat, its own light, and so it's the one that gives the most life to us. The moon doesn't give life to us, it just illuminates for us. And he also made the stars. The stars. It reminds me of something that Job said. Job, you remember, he was going through his tough time, and he was trying to come to grips with how great God is in the midst of all of his suffering. And here in chapter 9 of the book of Job, it tells us in verse 6 that he shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars. He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He made the bear, he made Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. That is a reference to the constellations of the sky. In other words, God made the stars. He made all of the constellations. Interestingly enough, that the constellations were made and, in a sense, given a story to tell prior to the devil messing it all up. You know how the devil messes up the constellations? By creating the religion of astrology. Astrology has changed the message that they were intended, the constellations and the stars were intended to give to humankind. You remember what the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 1. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became empty in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to become wise, they become fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up to uncleanness, or to live unclean lives in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. Now here is what happens once again when the devil interferes with things. God created something beautiful. The stars, the constellations, the sun, the moon. And throughout the history of mankind, isn't it true that man began to worship those things? The worship of the sun god, very big in Egypt. The worship of the moon, the worship of stars, the constellations, the astrologists, astrology, the horoscope. And all of these things are all part of this other religion when they were designed to tell the story of the designer. There is a designer. Now, you can look at all of creation and you look at it and you say, wow, this didn't just happen. Somebody did this. But who? You see, creation shows you that somebody did it. It doesn't tell you who. And that becomes then the pursuit of mankind, which makes sense, which is why so many people fall into other kinds of religion. In their search for the truth, they sort of latch on to anything that might make sense. Unfortunately, what God is saying is when the real truth is presented to mankind, man says, nah, I'm happy with my own truth. I'll keep my own version of the truth. It's much easier, and that way I don't have to surrender my life to anybody. I just keep my own life and do things my own way. Well, this is where the devil comes in and blinds the minds of mankind so that they choose instead to believe a lie rather than the truth. And that's what Romans 1 is talking about here. Well, God created the stars. He created these two balls to hang in the sky to rule the day and to rule the night. Verse 19, so the evening and the morning were the fourth day. On the fourth day, he created all of the outer space. Then God said, let the waters abound with abundance of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So these are the first creation of living things, the animals, the mammals, the fish, the whales, and all the things, the giant sea creatures, many of which are probably extinct by now. Interesting how all of these creatures appeared instantly when God said so. Let the waters abound. Poof. I don't know, was there splashes in the water when all of these creatures just showed up in the sea, and all of the atmosphere of the sky exploded with the sound of birds and creatures flying around, and dinosaurs were no doubt involved at this time. They were all over the place. God created all of that. And all of these appeared on the scene instantly. Let me just make something very clear. They didn't evolve. They just appeared when God said so. And let me just go a little bit further. The fossil record is evidence that God made everything at once. And what I mean by that is, there is no evidence that exists that somehow there are different stages to the creation of these things, or the existence of these things. Only full fossils are in evidence now. Nothing, the missing links are not there. They don't exist because there are no such things. Yet the scientists want us to believe that. But that's part of Romans 1 again. They refuse to believe the truth. They refuse it. They don't want it. They don't want to retain God in their knowledge. And so they refuse God. They reject God. They reject the notion that God had anything to do with our existence. Well, if you believe that sort of thing, then it has an effect on what you think of yourself. It has an effect on what you think of your neighbor, what you think of other people in this world. And so if you believe that we're just an accident that occurred by the alignment of certain gases, a collision of some sort of outer space thing that created the seeds for humankind to one day become existent after millions of years of accidents, then you've got a problem. I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't even make sense. But there are those, of course, who believe that religiously, and I do mean religiously, because in order to believe evolution requires a great deal of faith. I like the book that I think it was Norm Geisler wrote. Dr. Geisler wrote a book, I Don't Have the Faith to Be an Atheist. I don't have the faith to be an evolutionist. I can't make that leap. But I can read what the Scripture says and believe that. I have that. We are not the ones who have the blind faith, but the atheists have the blind faith because they have to believe in a fossil record that doesn't exist. They have to take that leap of faith in order to make their religion make sense. And so I challenge you, if you've been in school and the school has robbed you of true Christian faith, reconsider. That's why the book of Genesis is so important. This is what we call the Word of God. This is what God revealed to us as to the origin of mankind, the origin of the world. So rethink it. Don't listen to your scientists. Don't listen to your professors because they are definitely out of touch with reality. They refuse the lie. Give them the answers they want so you can pass your test. Don't worry about that. Give them the answers they want. That's what they believe. Reminds me of when my kids were young and they were at the age, we didn't really, talk about Santa Claus and all. And we would go to my mom's house for Christmas. And I remember warning my kids, listen, kids, we're going to go to Grandma's house. And Grandma believes in Santa Claus. So let's not ruin it for her. That's the way we approached it. So we went there, and Grandma played Santa Claus, and they just, no big deal. Okay, they'd look at us, and they'd wink. We know there's not really Santa Claus, but let's not ruin it for Grandma. Don't ruin it for your professors. But if you have an opportunity to tell them about the love of Christ, I urge you to do so. There's no point in standing up in class and getting yourself all beat up. You don't have to do that, but you have an opportunity at certain places. Take it and run with it. Let the waters abound, and the sea creatures came. In verse 22, and God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. Something to point out here is that God created reproduction. He created this reproductive ability for all of the living creatures to be able to reproduce and perpetuate their kind, their line. God blessed them and said, go and multiply. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind. You're going to see that a lot. Cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the beast of the earth according to its kind. Cattle according to its kind. Every living thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind. God saw that it was good. Now this phrase, according to its kind, is a very important thing because God allows a great deal or a great amount of variation within the kinds. The kind of animal, like for instance the dog or the horse or the lowly donkey. They're all different kinds. The goats, they're different kinds of goats, but they're all goats. In other words, the theory of evolution is one that says that it's possible for a goat to become a horse. But that's not possible. They can variate or change a little bit in how they will develop over time. And a gray horse might become a black horse in its lineage later on, or something like that. But never will a goat become a horse. Never will a fish become a dog. It's not the right kind. It will never happen. God's command was that it would stay in its kind, and they would always duplicate after or according to its kind. And that's the way it is now. It's estimated there are 8.5 million species of animals today. 8.5 million. And it's just an estimate, because who can count that high? Who can really know? We don't really know. And you know, if you've ever watched the news or certain websites, science sites, you realize they are finding or discovering new species of animals all the time that they never knew existed, especially in the deepest sea. They're finding all kinds of crazy things down there. And even in the deep forests, the Amazon and places like that, they're able to find all kinds of new critters that they've not found before. So they have to estimate, and that's how many they think we have. Well, that's the animal world that is created. And then God said in verse 26, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Now, this is different. God created the animals and He created man, but He created man differently than what He creates mankind. He created man differently than what He created the animals. God created man in His own image. Let us, God said, Elohim. Now that word Elohim is that, as I said, that plural principle of the one true God. The one true God is God in three persons. We know from the exposition of the entire Bible that God is Father, Son, and Spirit. This is the God in three persons, as we say. And so this is a mystery that God has revealed in His name, Elohim. But here He goes even further as He unveils for us this reference to the Trinity when He said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Now, the argument that some have is that God was talking to the angels. But God isn't going to say to the angels, "We're going to make man like us," because God isn't anything like the angels. God created the angels. God was talking to the Father, or the Son and the Spirit. They were in themselves, if you will, agreeing to this idea of the creation of man. He's going to become like us. We're going to make him like us in the sense of that he's going to, man is going to have an ability to have the thought, to reason, to think. He's different than the animals that act strictly by natural instinct. Man will have an instinct, but he's also going to have intelligence. He's going to have the ability to sense spiritual things, whereas an animal doesn't. Mankind can have the spiritual life. And so here is this body, soul, spirit concept, the Trinity, if you will, of man, the body, the soul, and the spirit. Let us make man in our image. Man's different, as I said, than the animals. And let mankind have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So this is another way that man is like God in that we have authority. We have been given authority or dominion over other critters, other creatures, other animals, other living things on the earth. We are over them. We are on top of them. We are to subdue them, as he's going to say here in just a bit. Our job is to do so, to take control of God's creation. Here it says, over the flesh of the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle, those are domestic animals, over the wild animals, all the animals of the earth. These are the wild animals, and even the creepy things like snakes, gross, and snake charmers, things like that. We are to be over them all. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Let me just point out, such a relevant thought is that there is no confusion in what God was creating. A male and a female. Those are the two that pair up. They go together, male and female. The way the world sees it today doesn't necessarily have that distinction. They are very confused. And the confusion, obviously, is because the devil has the ability to deceive, to lie. Today's confusion is due to Satan's ability to blind the minds of people to the truth, as he lies and tricks people to believe these lies in order to destroy them. That's the whole plan of the devil. He has not enlightened modern man to some new thing. It's the oldest trick in the book. God is not confused. He created man, he created woman for a partnership. That's the way it works. It's the only way it works. It doesn't work any other way. You can call it love if you want, but it's not divine love, and it's not the way God has ordained it. God blessed the man and the woman, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it," or tame it, "have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on the earth." So rule over it or dominate nature, dominate creation. That's the role of man. Now, we must get something straight. That was the role of man in his perfect state. When sin entered the world, it ruined man. And so now man has abused his God-given authority over the earth and has caused tremendous harm. And there have been, and will be further consequences for the abuse that we have done toward God's good creation. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. When we look at it now, we try to say, well, then why aren't we not doing it right? Because we're fallen. We're sinful. That's why it's not right. And we're never going to get it this way again until Jesus puts it that way. So there are a lot of wishful thinkers in our world today. They want to go back to the way it was before. It's impossible. It will never go back that way by our doing. It will only be restored when the King of Kings comes and puts everything right. So don't sweat it. Don't feel the guilt. Just get right with God through Jesus Christ, and then do your part to help others along the way. That's the best thing to do right now. And God said, "See, I have given you every herb," that's the plant, "that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth." This is, by the way, a favorite verse of Californians today. What, did I say something wrong? This is the herb, the marijuana plant. Never mind. God, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed to you. To you it shall be for food. So prior to the fall in chapter 3, man didn't eat meat. He was a vegetarian, completely. Not vegan, but vegetarian, because he would eat eggs, I'm sure, and everything else that was part of that. But he was vegetarian for the most part and didn't eat anything of meat of any kind, because prior to the fall there was no death. So nothing died, meaning not even your own food, except for a plant. You can eat a plant. God gave that. It's sustainable. You can keep eating it all you want. Also, every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. Therefore, we had the same diet as the animals did on this earth prior to the fall. Remember in Genesis 3, after the fall, the first thing that we see God do is sacrifice an animal. An animal died. And so thus, became the beginning of barbecues. So again, it's the origins. This is origin of barbecue right here in Genesis as well. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So God was pleased with all of his creation, everything that he had made. He put it exactly the way he wanted it to be. So keep that in mind as we start moving through the next couple of chapters, because the next two chapters, all of this beauty of creation will be undone in just one bad decision. Let's pray together. Lord, there is a beautiful story of your creation. Lord, of course, it requires some faith to believe in your creation, but it's written right here in black and white. And so you've basically told us the story. And so it's easier to believe something that's written rather than to believe a theory that was invented in someone's mind who doesn't want God. And so, Lord, we come to you in faith and accept the written record that you have preserved for thousands of years for us to read, to know, to commit our lives to. We are so thankful that the Creator belongs to us and that we belong to the Creator. Lord, prior to our surrender to you, we were living in darkness and our lives were a wasteland and empty. But then you came and gave our little world purpose. You gave us purpose. And the purpose that we have now is to serve you and to live for you. So bless your children now. Keep working in our hearts and in our minds as our faith is built on our minds and what we understand through your revelation. So speak to us now in Jesus' name. Amen.